Well, thank you so much, Alex, for joining us today. And I'm so excited when I get to talk to people who are kind of in the day to day of working on interesting topics and interesting sectors that really affect and impact people's lives. And you've kind of had a lifelong journey of that so far. So let's kind of get into a little bit of the journey you had before becoming president of the Andrew Goodman Foundation.
I started off my career as a corporate litigator, and
Interesting.
it was pretty interesting. So I practiced at law firms, and I spent my career doing work that at least the day job component that I didn't really care about. And so I would fill the rest of my time with pro bono work and the work that I really cared about. But then kind of in law school, I came up with the idea that I wanted to open up a school. And so I treated my law firm work like a really high-powered fellowship that would pay me while I was really pounding pavement to open up a school. And so for years, I worked to build a board, to learn about a startup and how to launch a startup and all of that, and gathering up people who could support me, fundraising, things like this, until I launched my school. And I was really, really proud. And the new school was a school model that allowed 7th and 8th grade African-American boys to travel to Ghana and then come back for boarding school, high school. And then I merged my school with another school that I founded called Ember Charter School. It's located in Brooklyn, New York. And, just lots of years surrounded by education and students and young people. And I really, really loved it. Made me feel really invigorated. And then I left the school realm to help other people launch their nonprofit startups, and was really helping founders grow their orgs to scale and to define their missions and to really figure out how they were going to fill a hole and how they could figure out their staffing and their programming in a way that would really make sense, especially in the confines of their limited resources. And then after that, I helped a member of the Rockefeller family start a nonprofit that was all about reparations for American slavery. And that was very interesting.
You've delved in a lot of interesting sectors so far.
And I mean, I even have, my staff loves to make fun of me. They're like, what haven't you done? I was a matchmaker for a time. I've done a lot of interesting jobs. And then, I made my way to the Andrew Goodman Foundation. I knew for sure from like 2019, 2018, that I was going to be really involved for the election of 2020. And I wanted to figure out what I was going to do. No matter what I was going to do, I was going to do something that was going to be really impactful. And so when I learned about the Andrew Goodman Foundation, I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity to really drive youth engagement and get the young people out to vote, which is going to be a really big point for this election. This is a great place for me to put my time and talent. And so that's what kind of led me to the Andrew Goodman Foundation.
Well, I want to touch on a lot of things. And the first would be your sort of education journey, because starting a nonprofit is hard enough, right? But starting like a school is another totally, different realm in itself, because I'm sure there's so much that goes into that, it's different than starting a hunger nonprofit, right? Or something around immigration or some other aspects. A school kind of encompasses so many different aspects of a lot of different angles. So like, what goes into actually like starting a school? Like that is such a rare thing to like talk about with somebody. So like, what is even like, how do you even start to go about doing something like that?
Yeah. So when I first came up with the idea for the new school, I was in law school, which is like a whole nother story, because I knew I didn't want to practice traditional law. And I did a little bit of criminal defense work for young people. And I felt like this is just putting a Band-Aid on a wound that I need to get below the surface of this. And I thought education would really be that. And for me, it was. And the whole story about why I wanted young people to study abroad was from my own experience.
I love it. Yeah. It's such a huge thing.
Yeah. And being put in special ed when I was in high school being told that I wouldn't graduate from high school, all these things. It was really important to me to be that kind of change agent. And so I had this great idea and this great mission, but you're exactly right. Bringing it into actual fruition is a whole nother bag of worms. And I remember I had my first business plan. I'll never forget it. I came up with it with my best friend, who was also my law school classmate. We were sitting in like Chipotle, and we wrote it. And I remember I put a poem in it, and it was just like, all heart, like no, no numbers, no nothing. And so, so I got the idea from my school from a documentary called The Voice of Baraka. And I love this documentary. In fact, my mentor at my summer program that I was doing in law school said, you should watch this if you want to open a school. And it was the idea for me. They were taking boys from Baltimore, bringing them to Kenya for 2 years. And I was like, wow, this is exactly what I want. So I contacted the producers of the movie and I said, can you connect me with anybody who interviewed? And they're like, okay, Soccer, sure. And so they gave me all these people's phone numbers, which I don't know why they would do that. And I don't even know how, it was just, anyway, that's the internet, power of the internet. So I traveled to Baltimore and I began doing a case study. This is a school that I love that was very similar to my model. And this is what I always tell like entrepreneurs who are, first look at what's already being done. Like, don't think that you're the brilliant person who's who's starting something new. Don't reinvent the wheel. So I went down, I really looked at their model, how they funded it, how they got it approved by the state, which was really important, how they were managing the staff. How did the students feel about it? What were the parents thinking about letting their children travel abroad? How did they convince parents? Like I broke it down bit by bit and really studied it. And then I said, okay, that's one model. What are other models? Since I traveled the country and I looked at all types of models for schools, especially if there was a boarding component, I studied those. Then I traveled abroad and I looked at schools in South Africa. I looked at schools in Ghana. I looked at schools in India. Now I was a corporate lawyer, so I had a little bit of money. So I was able to do some things. But then I quit my job and I did it full time and didn't have any money and had no income. And I remember there was a time, because my school was in Ghana, where I was living in somebody's shed behind their house. And, just like pounding pavement, going to the embassy every day, like getting people to approve it, getting a lawyer on the ground, getting land, all of that stuff. It's just like systematic, bit by bit, and really going through my checklist. And okay, I need a lawyer. I need to make sure that we are registered in Ghana. We need to be registered in the US. I need to be a 501c3. We have no money, so who's going to do this for free? And really just working through it step by step. And, this is why I help other nonprofits launch. That took me years, like almost a decade. Most of it because I didn't quit my job. I was going very slowly. And so all of that time I was really going through it. I was aligning myself with people who had done it before, with great mentors. I made a board. And it was my first board that I built. And I really thought about, okay, what are the skills that I don't have? And who do I need to put into my board such that I can kind of accelerate? And then I went to accelerators for entrepreneurs. And I would always be the lone nonprofit person. And they were like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm learning. That's what I'm learning.
But that's a great advantage to have too, though, right? Because you're gonna get like a lot of attention, right? Being like the only nonprofit there, people will probably love to give you their advice, right? You could you could talk. I mean, I think it's a great idea, and it's a great tip or advice for anybody wanting to start a nonprofit just in general, right? Like I always tell people, like, join an accelerator. There's actually a good amount out there now, specifically for nonprofits, but like,
there weren't when I was coming up.
No, I know.
When I was coming up, it was just me, but I loved it. I went to pitch competitions. I won. I really learned because all of those skills are so applicable. I treated my nonprofits like businesses. That's why they're always professional. That's definitely a missing point.
What was sort of like the successes of the school? Like, could you give us an idea of like, what, I don't know, success stories is like weird to say, but just like overall things that like really worked well
Yeah.
that, other people could take from it that, and I don't know where it's at now, if it's kind of
Mhm.
something else now, if it merged into something else, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, talk us through kind of the success of it.
Well, there were so many. So some of the early successes I was really proud of, especially as it pertained to structure, because
Hmm.
I was pounding pavement, the thing that I really wanted was to be a charter school in the US, which was
Love
really
it.
challenging.
I'm a very big proponent of charter schools. I think it's,
Yes.
I
Well,
love it. I
thank you.
mean, I think it's the way forward, but that's another
I
show.
agree. No, well, have me on that show too.
Okay. Well,
But
gladly.
absolutely love charter schools and also agree that it's the way forward. So initially, when I lived in Nashville, I found so there are different people who approve charter schools.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I found the one in the state of Tennessee that I was going to utilize. And this is actually a success and a failure. So I got a huge foundation in Tennessee to fund our school.
Okay.
And it was going to bring kids from Nashville and Memphis. It's going to be a really cool school model and boarding and like so had a foundation said we'll pay for the whole thing. And so I got my charter application together, went through the process, submitted it. It was like the bar all over again or worse or dissertation, and it was huge and it was hard. And then so the entity that approves it said, you know what, we're scared about this model, so we're not
Hmm.
sure, and we're going to hold this. Would you apply next year? And I was like, hell no. Because
That's a long time.
it was like so terrible process. Meanwhile, there was a foundation in Rochester, New York, which had the worst outcomes for African American boys. So it was like, come up
Interesting.
here, we want you. So
Right,
to me, it
right.
was the success of like I was pounding pavement, and there was like a bidding war for it. Ultimately, I ended up going to Brooklyn and merging my school with another school founder who had a boarding
Mm,
school had a regular elementary school and middle
interesting.
school in Brooklyn. So we
Okay.
merged the two models and brought the international component, the boarding component, the
Love it.
work on identity and social emotional intelligence with
Mm,
the things that that school had, which were like heavy emphasis on STEM and integrated learning models and a lot of identity work. So put the two schools together, created this boarding school component, took the kids abroad to South Africa, took
wow.
the kids on trips to Virginia and places, and really took them outside of
The
the
bubble, the
borders of
bubble. Yeah. I
Brooklyn.
mean,
And the school had outrageous successes,
mhm.
improvement in math and STEM by 200%, high performance in the state for academic outcomes, and really showed that you don't have to teach the test. You don't have
Mhm.
to neglect people's identity, particularly racial identity. You don't have to neglect the state curriculum. You can still take the state curriculum and adapt it and make it culturally relevant and really have fantastic success. So,
Yep. No,
yeah.
it's going back to really quickly in Tennessee. Was it the school board that you have to go get approved
So,
from? It's just the state. It's just a body within the state.
yeah, it's actually an independent body. So, like in New York, in the state of New York, there are three different entities that can
Mhm.
approve a charter, and it's like in the city level, state level, but it all ultimately is approved by like the Board of Regents. And so there's like different realms. And so, but in Tennessee, they had something similar. It was like an independent on the state level entity that would give these approvals to give the charter. And it was supposed to be kind of like a disruptor.
Mm,
But they were a lot of the same.
yeah, I'm sure.
Hey there. My name is Asa Goldstein, and I'm the founder of Brandshine Creative Services, a boutique branding agency that helps ingenious heroes save the world, one idea at a time. We work exclusively with impact startups like yours, empowering your success by building your unforgettable brand, your eye-catching visual identity, and your state-of-the-art website. To learn more about how we can help your startup compete against the mainstream brands that stand in your way, and to book your free brand audit, visit brandshinecreative.com.
Going into the Andrew Goodman Foundation, it's interesting because like your time as a lawyer, I feel like has set you up for a lot of different things because one, it just being a lawyer, you kind of look at things from a different aspect than other sides of companies or organizations. And it's specifically around voting. It
Mm,
sucks because there's like so many, it's so difficult, it seems like nowadays to even vote. It's just so weird that it's tough. I was like, all the holidays we have like in America, a
right,
voting not like it seems so anti-American that we don't make it a 3-day weekend of like voting.
right,
Like take Friday, Saturday, Sunday, shit, even Monday, like make it a 4-day, like the biggest holiday. This is what we preach to the world, right? It's like
right.
democracy, like voting. And like yet it's like it's horrible to do. Like honestly, it's like not even fun anymore. Like it just becomes the anti-holiday, really. I say all that to say like where are we at right now, and what does the foundation sort of do to whether it's simplify voting for young individuals, whether it's trying to unwrap the difficulties of it and present them in an easy digestible way on what they need to go through to get registered, or to
Mhm.
just vote in general, and all the different complexes there are now.
Yes.
Just give us an overview of the foundation first, and I guess its mission.
Sure. Well, you said a whole word right there.
Ah,
There's
sorry.
so
Yeah.
much good juice in there. I want to make sure to address it all. So the Andrew Goodman Foundation is all about young people, and its mission is to basically magnify the voices and votes of young people in our democracy.
Hmm.
And so you can imagine that in 2020,
Hmm.
like what a hell of a year. What a dumpster fire.
It was just just erase it from the just old school whiteout. Can we just old school whiteout 20?
Basically, I mean, what a mess. So, of course, I mean, all the things that people, you just can't overstate how outrageous last year was. So, you've got the pandemic, you have social unrest because of all these lynchings that are happening in the streets. You just have young people in the middle, like, what the hell?
Crazy
And
time for them.
so outrageous, especially imagine you're a college student, you're on campus or
Mm,
you're heading to campus, depending on like, the timing. There was so many things that happened. They were displaced. Our students had issues about housing insecurity. They lost
mm,
their work study. There was a
mm,
question whether their schools would even open again. A lot of their parents lost their jobs. And there was a question about whether they could even afford to go back. Some
yeah.
people have underlying health issues. And they were like, I'm not going back to campus, whether it's open or not, because it's not safe.
Right.
I'm risking my whole life. There were so many things. And so around April of last year, May, people were not worrying about voting. They're like, I'm trying to
Great
stay
point.
alive.
Yeah.
Like,
Great point.
I literally need to live. And so people kept calling me, asking me to do appearances. They're like, young people aren't going to vote. They're not going to vote. Everybody's, all the surveys are coming out that they don't give a damn about voting. I'm like, would you? Like, this is a crazy, nobody's thinking about voting. No, in the hierarchy of human needs right now, voting is not at the top because of what's
Hmm.
going on in the world. But I said, but hold on, because there's a long way to November, essentially.
Hmm.
And so our job in that time was all about really, so at Andrew Goodman Foundation, we're on 93 campuses across the United States. We don't just come in for an election and then leave. That's what a lot of
Hmm.
organizations do. We're there all year round, working with our students, making sure that they really are tapped in. And because we have these relationships with students, we were helping students around housing insecurity, work
Mm.
study issues. We were like really taking a much more holistic approach than ever before. And so we were able to really see what are the barriers that you're experiencing. And they were many. So to your point, this thing that I hear all the time, that voting isn't that hard. What's the big deal? Suck it up. It's all a fiction. There
Hmm.
were specific, very, very specific barriers put in the way of students, particularly students of color, to keep them from the vote. And
Hmm.
it was very intentional. And so to all of this stuff that around like, well, who cares about the ID restrictions and who cares about this and that? It's all voter suppression. Like, let's be clear. And so we
Hmm.
were helping our students navigate it. And there were issues where students were trying to register, and there were so many issues around that. So imagine you submitted an application to vote on your campus or in your town, and where
Yep.
you're learning, but you're actually from another state. And I'll make it more tangible. I'm from Connecticut. If in Georgia, where I submitted the registration application, I submitted it from my campus housing, but I'm
Gotcha.
not there anymore. When the
Mm-hmm.
registrar was sending the application or information back to campus,
Mm-hmm.
it was bouncing back because the students weren't there. And when it bounced back, they were wiping students wholesale from the registry. And so people didn't even know that they were no longer registered to vote. They said, oh, I'm registered. They didn't even know.
Interesting.
And then some.
And that's a ton of students, because a lot of students go
gosh.
out of state for school. Of course.
Yeah, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of students.
Yeah.
And then there were some counties that got hip to it because schools were trying to be helpful. A lot of schools, we were talking to schools, okay, can you forward the information to students, where their home address is? So we were, helping. And counties were like, okay, we're now making it illegal for you to do that. I mean, they were getting so hip to it, hip. And they were adjusting because they were trying to keep students from voting. And then we had students show up when it was time to vote with their student IDs. And luckily it happened in the primary. So we knew that this was going to happen for November. And they're like, oh no, we don't accept that ID. Sorry. You accept a gun license. You accept all types of other things, but you don't accept a student ID. Come on now. I mean, these were just like really intentional ways to keep young people from voting. And they get a little bit more, relevant. Some states are like, fine, we accept state student IDs, but not private. And they know good and damn well that's HBCU students. So, I mean, it was just so intentional and so clear. And we saw it so much. And we were there to help students every step of the way. So for the very first question, students are like, well, where should I register? I'm home, but should I do absentee? Like what makes the most sense? Of course, we're not going to tell anyone this is where you should register, but we made decision trees. So to help them like make a decision, if this applies to you, if you feel this way, if you feel that, so they could kind of navigate. And then, okay, now you want to do absentee voting. Here's how you do it. Here's the application. Here's how you can do it so it's not rejected. And then a lot of students, like 70% of students wanted to vote early. Here's the deadline. Here's what you have to do. Then they wanted to vote by mail. Okay, so this is what you have to do. A lot of vote by mail ballots were rejected. We found out which ones were rejected, and we were helping students cure their ballots. We were helping notify students that their ballots were rejected when they weren't being notified, or we were helping students know how to track their ballot to make sure that it was actually accepted. And there were just
crazy.
I mean, this is ridiculous. And you're right. This is America. Did we really have to do all that? And a lot of times we were the only organization in a place doing this work. And it really harms me because I've spent so much time working and studying abroad. And America always holds itself up as this place of democracy. And when you really see how hard people are working to vote, and I'm one of them. I mean, my story, the reason why I was really drawn to the Andrew Goodman Foundation and the particulars with the youth is because in 2020, when I went to go vote, I was basically rejected from the polling precinct. I was told that I wasn't registered, even though I had my confirmation card and I had everything that I needed to vote. And they said, but we don't see you in the books. And that was it. Goodbye. Well, I mean, that's not who I am. So I didn't take no for an answer. I literally fought tooth and nail. I made a sit-in. I got on TV. Ultimately was not allowed to vote, but it was such a turning point in my life because the Secretary of State, I was such a thorn in her side that she hired me, and we brought in the provisional vote bill that is now law across the country. Because I was like, hell no, I'm not gonna, But
what does that bill say, or what does it do?
At the time, it was Senate Bill 213 in Georgia, and now the provisional vote law is law all across the country. Where let's say you go in to vote. And they say, we don't see you here, and you know that that's your precinct, then they'll allow you to fill out a provisional vote ballot that they'll kind of set aside. And then they will later confirm that you are registered, and they'll count it in a second wave. So
gotcha.
It's the thing that would have allowed me to vote on that day that, just didn't exist.
Is there ways to simplify this? Like,
God, yes.
this part, like, that was a bad way to phrase it. Because of course there is, right? I guess, what are the realistic things that can get passed that can simplify things for not just students, but, I assume there's the same issues with other sectors of society that they don't deal with the direct same issues as students.
Definitely.
But they similar, right? The idea that it's difficult to vote.
Definitely.
Like what were some of the things, like does the foundation work on like help create policy around simplification of certain things, and maybe what are the low-hanging fruits, so to
Right.
speak, that we can kind of go after, I guess.
Yeah. I want to actually highlight another community that people don't talk about a lot, which is the disabled community.
Great point.
I was
Yeah.
shocked by literally so we did a litigation in New York for Bard College because the county had taken the polling precinct off campus, and like the largest population were the students, and they put it 3 miles down from campus on this rickety road that was very hard to access. And if you didn't have a car, forget it, in this very tiny polling precinct that was not ADA compliant. So people who had disabilities literally could not vote. And people were just okay with that. And so when we did our lawsuit and I heard the stories of people who, harrowing stories of trying to vote and just literally could not vote, it was just devastating. And these are the stories that I don't think people talk about a lot. But so what can you do? And what could be done? So people don't, and I'm like shocked, as an aside, how partisan For the People Act has become, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
Right.
It makes me so sad. And I've been on podcasts recently where I've gotten into debates with people. We've had schools say we don't want to support Andrew Goodman Foundation anymore because they think we're being liberal or that we're being partisan by supporting these acts. It is so anti-American that I don't even, it's almost hard for me to describe.
It's
I've been
crazy.
told
I know.
that For the People violates the First Amendment. That is not true. As a lawyer, I can tell you it doesn't. It is so, and it's just gaslighting and dog whistling. It makes no sense. I do not understand why people are not supporting For the People Act. Someone said that automatic voter registration is anti-American. How? Or that it strips someone of their right to decide. That's not true. That's not true. Everybody who's American should have the right to vote. I mean, that's like inherent to being an American. If you don't want to vote, that's your business, but you should have the right to. And this piece, so there's so many things like same-day registration, automatic registration. There's all these things. Having what you described before, having these holidays around voting, so that you don't have to decide between working and feeding your family and voting.
This is like the low-hanging fruit that I talk about, right? There's such the ID stuff and like precincts and complicate and all this stuff, right? It's just like, okay, what is step one here? Like what sometimes I think when legislation tries to go through and look, just I don't know everything that's in it, but usually we try to pass broad legislation, right? And it's very difficult to do that, where it seems like push a little bit out, like every few months, say pass the holiday first, right? Then pass this, almost break up For the People Act into 4 bills rather than one, so it could be clear cut, it could be debated much easier because it's simplified. There's not all those things stuck in it from both sides, right? That always happens in every bill. But like the holiday part seems to be the most bipartisan thing ever created. Like I don't understand how that wouldn't pass unanimously, both the House and Senate, in a day. Like what would be against it? I guess what is the argument against that? And I don't know that there is. I guess it would be presented with other things attached to it. That's why it would get voted down. But like what, can we just put that up for a vote by itself? What a simple sentence bill, right? Like,
right. Well, that's never gonna happen.
Right. But like
I truly
such a win for America, right?
That's such a great point. I honestly don't know. You're like talking to the wrong person, because whenever I hear people's arguments against these things, I'm like, I'm floored. And we've taken so much heat because we are a nonprofit. We are inherently nonpartisan, bipartisan, whatever. I guess bipartisan, but we're not agnostic. We care about our democracy, and we want to make sure that people have access to it. So when these things have been signaled as, oh, that's very, you're being a Democrat or whatever, that to me it really, honestly, this has been a struggle for me to understand. And I do think a holiday is the absolute baseline. And when people are against things that would give people access to voting, you have to really wonder, well, what's really the motivation?
Anytime somebody says that, you'd be like, I had the most Republican job of all time. I was a corporate lawyer, right? Like if I'm if you can't agree with me, then like who are you gonna agree with?
Well, that's true. That's true.
But anyway, so going back to sort of some of the issues that students face, right? And I guess 92 campuses is a ton, right? So you get a lot of voices
Oh,
from
yeah.
a lot of different parts of the country too, right? North, south,
Mm.
east, west, coast, middle. What are some of maybe the high priority issues that, all students talk about, want change in? Are there some, maybe a couple that everybody, no matter what campus they're on, have issues with and want to see their voices sort of be heard on that
Yeah,
issue?
for sure. So we heard, and that's, first of all, it's a great question because previously, like in 2018 and before, the Andrew Goodman Foundation was very like non-issue based, and intentionally. But
Yeah.
then over time, we saw exactly as you're saying, across the country, there are trends that majority of students really, really are concerned about. Our economy, there was like so much concern about jobs, so much concern about loan forgiveness, and then our environment. There was just like, this is
Yeah.
very much a Gen Z concern and a dissatisfaction with what's going on. Overall, we find that young people are way more progressive. They care about racial justice. They care about LGBTQ plus community and its discrimination. And you hear more and more about equity. And this is something that we hear across the board. Even in the most conservative places, there's a concern about the way that people are being treated. So these are the things that I find are like the big trends.
At Brandshine, our comprehensive brand strategy process ensures that your impact brand is strategically positioned and can put its best foot forward to both investors and potential clients. Then, we work with world-class designers to craft your new logo and your unique visual flair. But we don't stop there. We write, design, and develop your new website in Webflow, a cutting-edge platform that delivers incredible websites that are easy to maintain without our help. To download the free 7-step guide to building a market-ready impact brand, visit brandshinecreative.com/causeartist.
Going back to a little bit of your history and maybe early on when we were trying to figure out like starting a school thing, it's such an interesting sector in itself is sort of education, right? Now you're sort of dealing with college, right? And sort of this bedrock system that kind of has never been sort of innovated, right? In a lot of ways, the cost keeps going up higher and higher. There's kind of different schools and technology coming out where there are options maybe for people who, look, I mean, most people can't afford to go to college, no matter like where you're from, what state. Like it's just very, very expensive. And now there's sort of, I love these boot camps that are coming up. Like if you just want to go be a software developer, you could do that in a year and like that's it. You don't have to deal with all the debt, all the other stuff that goes into it. But is there ways that from your background and looking at charter schools to take maybe that same philosophy into like higher education, or maybe take things that alternative higher education has done, maybe, and bring that, look at ways that could disrupt, primary education? Because it's such an important thing that has never been sort of innovative is, our school system. And it's just tragic. I mean, it's what we have at our disposal that creates the next generation for us, right? And I don't know that we invest innovation into it, like, technology, or we're sending people to Mars, but like we can't have air conditions in schools, right? Like there's just a weird disconnect of what we invest in and what we're proud of. But I don't know, how can we look at education and innovate that part of it, whether it's elementary ever or university level?
So one thing that we used to say about our school was that it was like the first K-12 university. So the
I
innovation
love that.
is highlighted about bringing college education to like the
Yes.
K-12 space. And that really speaks to specific things that universities do. Emphasis on technology, professionalism of the teachers, like really high level, highly compensated, highly qualified and supported faculty. And so that was a really big part of our innovation. And that was made possible by the charter school realm, because and it's the non-traditional way of looking at public school education, so people can have access to it and it doesn't have to, conform to the typical ways of like the worker bee model that's really bringing up people who don't have creative thinking, who all the things and the critiques of American education, which are very valid. So that is 100%, I think, where we're going to see more and more of that coming up in K-12 education because of the way that's structured. Interestingly, COVID, the pandemic has been just terrible. I mean, everything, all the loss of life, all of
Mhm.
the things that have happened, ways that we've seen policing really manifest in a terrible
Mhm.
way. But one thing that has come out of it that I think is going to be interesting to keep an eye on are the innovations that we've seen in higher education.
Yeah.
So one thing that people really are wondering, why am I paying all this damn money when I can work from home, but be home, get all my education on Zoom, never touch foot on a campus. So, and I don't really need to be in the brick and mortar dorm building. I don't really need your high expensive food plan. I don't
Mhm.
really need all the bells and whistles that you say are so
Yeah.
important to a college experience. Really, it's just me getting this damn education, which I can get on Zoom. And why am I spending so tens of thousands of dollars every year for this
Yeah.
thing that really you're showing is kind of, not as important as you said it was. And
Mhm.
so students are really demanding this and they're yelling about it. And honestly, I talked to a lot of college presidents last year and they were like,
Getting scared, huh? Get a little
hell,
nervous. Yeah.
they were scared as hell because they're like, well, are we going to shut our doors? Like, are people going to reevaluate the importance of this? And so I actually do think any time in history that things are going to be put on the table. And I do think
Mhm.
that there's going to be a reckoning for this time for school, how expensive it is. People are really getting
Mhm.
upset, what it's really providing. And I do think that there are a lot of models that have come up. We're seeing more and more emphasis on like 2-year schools, and we're
Oh
seeing
yeah, absolutely.
big
Yeah.
colleges, and we're seeing the utility in that. And like you said, there's these other models that are coming up. My husband went to for
General
US
Assembly. Yeah,
General
General
Assembly.
Assembly. Yeah. Yeah.
Clearly, you see that's not my realm, but he
Yeah.
went to General Assembly. He's a
It's
UX
great.
designer,
Yeah.
and he had already gone to school and pivoted his career. And I do think, and I've seen a lot of these models, and they're really, really innovative. And I think we'll see more and more of that.
Yeah. I was unfortunate and fortunate enough to from New Orleans, Katrina happened
Mm.
and it essentially wipes out the city. And essentially what it did, it wiped out the school system.
Mm.
So
Oh yeah,
I don't know if you were aware of it, but New Orleans
I
was the
am
first city to go
all
charter
charter.
school, our charter school. So
Huh?
I think obviously this is it's a great case study, right? And we'll see if it works or not. I mean, there's some data coming out now that is, you need a decade to really, I think, get a really cohesive approach to what's working and what's not. But I'm hoping that that could sort of be a beacon for other school districts that have failed. Maybe, think about it, failing a generation. Like that is insane to me. That it's just like I don't know, but it's like listen, if this doesn't work for 30 years, maybe we should try to change something in
Right.
it. Oh, so that I'm hopeful out of, devastation and darkness that there's light that comes out of it in some way. And perhaps, educate higher education being accessible for more people is a positive. And just I think charter schools in general, I think bring, like you said, creative curriculum to it, a different approach to how people learn is so important. Like it's no way 25, 30 people in a classroom, everybody learns the same. It's impossible, right? So I think there's just so many things that, again, low-hanging fruit that we can look at and say, let's give this a chance because the old way just hasn't been working systematically for such a long time. But I don't know if you had any thoughts on, or if you know people in the New Orleans area or that went there as teachers or administrators and kind of looked at what was going on there from the charter school perspective.
Definitely. I've heard all good things about the opportunity for really amazing charter schools to come forward. And I've heard about some
Mhm.
really innovative, cool models in New Orleans. And I've actually gone down and done conferences there for charter schools and spent a lot of time going through the charter school system in New Orleans. So absolutely. And it's interesting to me, the critiques about charter schools. And I get
Mhm.
it. Anytime there's any kind of bad actors in any sector, people are like, write it
Of course.
off,
Yeah. Yeah. Of
throw
course.
the whole sector away.
So
And,
ridiculous.
and I think that that's really unfair. And there's been, of course, abuses in charter school leadership, of course. There's also been fantastic innovation and great things that have happened. So I'm really excited to see as well, like what we're talking about going down the road, looking at neurons as like a great case study. And I think what's interesting is that there are going to be some bad ones and there are going to be some fantastic ones. And that's a spectrum that we should embrace, and we should be okay with that, because not all of them are going to be perfect. It's impossible.
Yeah, but the ability to learn from the mistakes and make it better, I think, is an absolute positive in itself, right? To be able to like innovate quickly. If things are not working, you could see it, change it within a couple of years, rather than sticking with the same people or curriculum or whatever it is that's not working, change it, right? And that's the thing that I think is beneficial for it. I want to end on a little bit of Andrew Goodman's story. If you don't mind maybe sharing his sort of story, I think is pretty incredible. And, maybe we can end on kind of touching about his sort of unfortunate legacy that he had to leave behind to kind of, have all this happen after.
Yeah. So Andrew Goodman, a young man who traveled down to Mississippi for Freedom Summer, was trained among all of these young people who traveled from all across the country, Black and white, other races, who cared so deeply about what was happening in the South and Black people really being kept from the ability to vote, and the terror. Like, let's talk about the domestic terrorism people were experiencing. And if you ever see the movie Mississippi Burning, I think it's such a great example of the terror in these communities, all of the outrageous requirements to go vote. And then, people being lynched, people being murdered, people being really in fear of trying to exercise that right. Mm-hmm. And so Andrew Goodman went down because he thought it wasn't right. And so he was down there, and along with Michael Schwerner and James Earl Chaney, they decided to go in a car at night, and they were going to go to another community. And there was a rule that I heard, and there's so many great documentaries about this, and Bob Moses was talking about, there was a rule that if you were going anywhere, you had to check back in with somebody. And when they hadn't heard back from them, people knew that something was wrong. And the KKK viciously murdered these three men, tortured them. They weren't just murdered, they were tortured. Probably the most horrific thing for the country and for their families was that they weren't immediately found. So in June, they were murdered, and their bodies weren't found until August. All that time, searching and wondering what happened. Are they okay? Are they dead? Not having that closure. And the FBI went down, and there was all this searching and questioning of the locals. Do you know what happened? Black people afraid to say anything. People were terrorized. And then there's a Native American community that finally came forward and said, we know where the car is. It's here in the swamp. And that's when they were able to recover their remains in the car. And the horror kind of came to an end after this bloody summer. And so then the fruit of that was the Voting Rights Act of 1964. And really a lot of people talk about, and it's been said, there were a lot of people murdered, a lot of people murdered in that time. But when you see these two young white men, it really was a shock of the conscience on America. And they watched this and they saw it play out in media, and it was horrifying. And you see people's mothers and the loss of these families, and it really made it real. This is way out of hand. And so it allowed for this change to happen. And it was hard fought for. People, like I said, people were murdered. And so to know that decades later, the power of the Voting Rights Act of 1964 has really been diluted, and it's not as strong as it was, and it's lost a lot of its punch, is very scary. And so when we're talking about really reviving that act through the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, it's important, and we can't ignore that, and we can't turn a blind eye. And I'm seeing so much conversation across the country that's forgetting our history, and it's really repurposing it in a way that's so dangerous. So when I talk to young people and our students, and they are so horrified with what's happening in America, it really reminds me of the parallels between the 60s and now. And when I see young people in this movement demanding change, it really is empowering to me. And I know that if Andrew Goodman in his 20s could make such a difference, hopefully, young people don't have to be martyred to do it, but they can make so much change today.